We don't give presidential suites to people like you. I don't care what you think you paid for." That's what the hotel manager said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. No hesitation, no shame, just those cold words, sharp as glass, designed to cut. And in that moment, a 70-year-old black woman stood frozen, humiliated in front of a dozen strangers. She wasn't asking for anything more than the room her daughter had booked, paid for in advance. But to them, she was just a problem, just another body that didn't look like it belonged in luxury. Before we go deeper into this story of power, dignity, and long overdue justice, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state down below. And if you believe in dignity, in fairness, and in standing up when someone's been disrespected, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, because stories like this aren't fiction. They're lived, every day. And now, let me take you back to the moment it all began. It was just after 3 p.m. on a warm Thursday afternoon in Manhattan. The summer light spilled through the tall glass of the Luxe Vista Hotel, one of those places where the ceilings seemed to reach the clouds, and everything smelled like fresh orchids and old money. That kind of hotel. The kind where everyone whispers and walks like they have somewhere important to be. The kind that's built on image and assumption. Dr. Naomi Ellis, 43 years old, walked in through the main entrance like she belonged there, because she did. Her posture was perfect. Her heels didn't click. They landed, confident, precise. She wore a black blazer over a soft cream blouse, dark tailored pants, and a watch that said Silent Power. Her hair was pulled back in a low twist, understated but elegant. But it wasn't just Naomi who drew eyes. It was the woman beside her. Her mother, Diane Ellis, 70, retired schoolteacher, proud posture, soft eyes. She wore a pearl-colored dress that fell below the knee, simple black flats, and a small leather purse over her shoulder. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat, low bun, dignified, graceful, not flashy, but unmistakably out of place, at least in the eyes of some. They stepped into the main lobby like they had a right to be there, because they did. Diane glanced around, quietly impressed, but said nothing. Naomi smiled. "You sure you're comfortable here, Mom?" she asked softly, nudging her with a warm elbow. Diane gave her daughter a sideways glance. "Naomi, I used to clean hotel lobbies like this when you were still in pigtails. I'm not nervous. I'm just making sure you remembered to ask for the corner suite with the window that opens." Naomi laughed gently. "Already handled." They walked calmly to the front desk. There were 2 people behind the counter. One was typing. The other was scrolling through a tablet. Neither of them looked up. Naomi waited. A full 5 seconds, then 10. Still nothing. Finally, she leaned forward just slightly. "Good afternoon," she said with a clear, polite voice. "We have a reservation. Presidential suite. Name's Naomi Ellis." The woman at the desk, young, white, mid-30s, dark red lipstick, glanced up, then back down at the computer. She said nothing, not even a nod. Then, without a word, she stood and disappeared into the back office. Naomi blinked, surprised, but kept her voice level. She turned slightly to Diane. "That was odd." Her mother gave a slow nod, lips pressed together. "Not the first time I've been ignored at a desk," she said under her breath. 3 minutes passed. Then the woman returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her came another figure, taller, older, sharper. Her suit was tighter, her heels higher, her eyes sharper. Emily Carter, the floor manager. And from the second she looked at them, the air changed. Her expression froze somewhere between disbelief and disapproval. She walked directly toward the desk, then leaned slightly forward to the young employee, speaking just loud enough for them to hear. They said they booked the presidential suite? Emily asked. Yes, that's what she said. The employee replied. Emily straightened, glanced down at her screen, then looked up again, this time directly at Naomi, and her next words would change everything. We don't give presidential suites to people like you. I don't care what you think you paid for. Just like that. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a system glitch. It was said with intention, with that tone that doesn't need to shout to humiliate. The lobby, suddenly, felt smaller, quieter. A few guests nearby paused their conversations. A man in a linen suit turned his head. One woman lowered her phone mid-scroll. Naomi stood still, lips slightly parted. Diane instinctively reached for her daughter's hand, not in fear, but in support. In warning. Naomi didn't blink. I'm sorry. What did you just say? She asked, her voice calm, steady, but low enough to suggest this wasn't her first time being treated like this. Emily didn't flinch. I said, she repeated, your kind of reservation doesn't come through this hotel. If you'd like to speak to someone else, you're welcome to contact the corporate office. Diane's jaw clenched. Her hand trembled just slightly in Naomi's. And still, Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't snap back. She didn't threaten. She simply inhaled and said, Okay, we'll step outside, but this isn't the end of it. Emily didn't respond. She turned her back before Naomi even finished her sentence. And for the second time. The front desk said nothing. As they walked out of the lobby, two women who'd simply expected respect. Something shifted in Naomi's eyes. Not anger, not shock, but purpose. Like someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she planned to do next. Naomi had barely stepped outside the front entrance when she felt her mother's hand tighten just slightly around hers. It wasn't fear. It was something older than that. It was restraint, survival. Diane had lived through enough decades to know exactly what that moment inside the lobby had meant. And for a second, neither of them spoke. The sounds of Manhattan moved around them, horns blaring a few blocks away, a bus idling near the corner, footsteps passing behind them. But all Naomi could hear was the echo of those words still ringing in her chest. People like you. She had heard them before, in 100 different ways. Sometimes they came dressed as questions. Are you sure you belong in this line? Sometimes as compliments. You speak so well. And sometimes, like today, they didn't bother to pretend. Naomi blinked slowly, grounding herself. You okay? She asked, looking over at Diane. Her mother nodded, but she wasn't looking at her daughter. She was staring up at the glass panels of the lobby, her reflection faint against the polished facade. I've been called worse, Diane said softly. But it's different now. They didn't know who you were. Naomi exhaled through her nose. Exactly. She opened her purse, pulled out her phone, and started typing. Her fingers moved with calm precision. 3 names, 3 numbers. 1 to legal, 1 to PR, 1 to corporate security. She wasn't going to scream. She didn't need to. That's the thing about power. You don't have to raise your voice when you already own the building. Inside. The mood at the front desk had shifted, though no one was quite sure why. The manager, Emily Carter, was walking back to her office, unaware that a storm was already forming behind her. The front desk clerk, Nicole, glanced up once more through the lobby window and saw Naomi standing just outside. Still there, not causing a scene, just waiting. Calmly, purposefully. And that was somehow more unnerving than shouting. Guests nearby returned to their drinks and conversations, but an unease lingered. You could feel it in the air, like a light hum before thunder. Outside. Naomi tapped the screen one last time and held the phone to her ear. "Renee," she said quietly when the line picked up. "I need you to connect me with Sarah Chen at Legal." "Yes. Now. And I want Michael from HR on standby in the next 15. We've got a situation at Luxe Vista, Manhattan." She didn't need to explain. Renee had worked with her long enough to read between the lines. Naomi ended the call, then turned to her mother again. "We're not leaving. I want you to sit in the car. Stay cool. This won't take long." Diane gave her a long look, half worried, half proud. "I raised you to fight with your mind, not your temper," she said. "Just remember, they don't expect you to come back." Naomi gave a small smile. "That's the beauty of it." Meanwhile, back in the lobby, a woman near the fireplace had started whispering to her husband. "That woman, wasn't she on Forbes last year? Naomi Ellis, right?" Her husband shrugged, but she wasn't the only one starting to put the pieces together. A young bellhop at the far end of the counter leaned in toward Nicole. Was that her, the tech founder, with the chain of hotels? Nicole looked pale. No, couldn't be. She wouldn't show up without security or press. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. Something about Naomi's eyes had unsettled her. Something about the way she left without raising her voice made her stomach turn. And then, it happened. A black Mercedes S-Class glided to a stop out front. The doors opened. First the driver, then two women in dark suits stepped out, followed by a man in a crisp charcoal blazer with a silver tablet in hand. They weren't tourists, they weren't guests, and they weren't smiling. Within moments, Naomi stepped out behind them, calm as ever. The staff behind the desk froze. Emily, sipping espresso behind a half-closed door, didn't see them enter. Naomi didn't wait. She walked through the center of the lobby like it was hers. Because, in a way, it was not the building itself, but the values it was supposed to stand for. Respect, dignity, excellence. She had spent years building that reputation, investing in it. And today, that image had been shattered. Because her mother didn't look the part. Her heels clicked once, then twice. Before she stopped in front of the front desk, Nicole stood stiffly. The room went quiet. Naomi opened her mouth. But before she could speak, a voice called from behind the desk. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask." But Naomi raised one finger. She wasn't asking for permission. "My name is Dr. Naomi Ellis," she said, clearly and calmly. "I am the founder and majority shareholder of Luxe Vista International. This hotel is part of my private portfolio. I booked the presidential suite under my name 2 weeks ago." She turned slightly, gesturing toward the assistant now standing beside her. "This is Melissa Green, head of internal operations. She is here to conduct an immediate investigation into a breach of hospitality protocol, staff behavior, and discriminatory practices." The air went still. Nicole's mouth parted, as if to speak, but no sound came out. A few guests nearby lowered their phones, unsure whether to record or stay out of it. Diane remained in the car, watching quietly through the tinted window, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't angry. She wasn't surprised. She had seen too much over the years to be either. But what she hadn't seen, until now, was the way her daughter moved through the world. Quiet strength, absolute control, and unshakable purpose. Inside the lobby, the walls were still bright, the orchids still fresh, the piano music still playing softly in the background. But the mood had shifted, the energy had changed, and the people who just moments ago thought they knew who belonged and who didn't, suddenly weren't so sure. Naomi didn't need to shout. She didn't need to prove anything. All she had to do was show up. It all happened in less than a minute. But for Diane Ellis, time seemed to slow down. From her seat in the car just outside the grand glass entrance, she watched as her daughter stood firmly inside the lobby of a hotel that had moments ago turned them away. The same hotel she had helped finance through silent investments and early startup capital. The very vision she had watched Naomi build from late-night calls to international boardrooms. And yet, none of that mattered to the staff who had just labeled them as not the type. Inside, the marble lobby was still buzzing quietly, but eyes were beginning to turn. It wasn't just curiosity now, it was tension, the kind you feel in your chest before a storm breaks open. Naomi stood tall, flanked by her internal operations officer and legal counsel, their presence silent but commanding. The woman behind the desk, Nicole, had stiffened like a statue, and for good reason. Naomi wasn't someone she could brush off anymore. She wasn't just another guest with a complaint. She was the person who signed their paychecks, and had every right to pull the plug on this entire operation. Still, even with all that weight behind her, Naomi didn't raise her voice. That was the part that unsettled everyone the most. She didn't yell, she didn't demand. She simply stood there, calm, composed, unbothered, and that was terrifying. Just then, from the corner office near the elevators, Emily Carter reemerged, still holding her coffee cup, unaware of what she was walking into. As she glanced toward the front desk and saw Naomi again, standing there with 3 people in suits, something in her posture faltered. She straightened her jacket, cleared her throat, and walked forward, forcing a tight smile. "Dr. Ellis," she said, trying to smooth the edges of her tone. "I believe there's been some sort of misunderstanding." But Naomi cut in gently, never looking away. "Yes, there's been a misunderstanding. You misunderstood who you were speaking to, and more importantly, who you were humiliating, in front of a dozen guests, without so much as a second glance." Emily's smile flickered, fading like cheap makeup in the rain. "Of course," she started. "If you'd like to be rebooked." "Rebooked?" Naomi repeated, one eyebrow raised. "You think this is about a room?" Her voice didn't crack. Her tone didn't change, but the words carried weight. You could feel it. People nearby were no longer pretending not to listen. A man who had been reading a newspaper now stared openly. A couple sipping champagne in the lounge had stopped mid-toast. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, then continued. "You didn't just reject a reservation. You rejected a woman who's worked 40 years, raised 3 children, and helped build the very economy you profit from." Her words were measured, slow, but each one hit like a quiet drumbeat. "You didn't just dismiss a guest. You humiliated my mother." That word, mother, hung in the air like a final note in a silent room. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't know." "Exactly," Naomi replied. "And you didn't care to ask." Just then, the hotel's security guard, Mark, approached from the right. Tall, broad, ex-military in posture. He had been the one called to escort Naomi and Diane out earlier. He stopped when he saw Naomi again. This time, no one gave him orders. Naomi didn't even acknowledge him. She didn't need to. His role in this story was already done. Instead, she turned back toward Nicole. "You looked me in the eye and still acted like I was invisible." Nicole's hands trembled slightly, one still resting on the keyboard. I was just following protocol," she murmured. Naomi took a slow breath. "Is that what you call it? Protocol? Is that what Luxe Vista stands for now? Turning away black women because they don't look rich enough?" A sharp inhale cut through the lobby as guests processed the word black. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't hidden behind politeness. Naomi had said it plainly, without shame or filter. And that alone shifted the entire energy of the room. From outside, Diane was still watching, but her eyes had changed. There was no fear left, no pain, just pride, and a kind of quiet vindication that came only when truth steps fully into the light. She reached into her bag, pulled out her glasses, and put them on, like she wanted to see every second of this. Inside, a woman in a blue blouse who'd witnessed everything took out her phone and began recording. Slowly and discreetly. She wasn't the first. 2 more guests had already begun filming from different angles. Not because Naomi asked, but because the moment demanded it. Justice, in this era, often comes with a lens. Emily looked around and finally realized the gravity of her mistake. She wasn't just dealing with an angry customer. She had publicly humiliated a black elder, and now stood face to face with the CEO of the very company she worked for. "I didn't mean," she tried again, but Naomi raised a hand gently. "This isn't about what you meant. It's about what you did, and what you failed to see." Her eyes swept over the lobby, landing briefly on every employee in view. "You saw 2 black women. You assumed they didn't belong, and then you made them leave. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. A loud one." Her voice had dropped to a near whisper, but somehow it reached every corner of the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the soft music playing through the hotel speakers seemed to dim. "You're not just accountable to me," she added. "You're accountable to the very values printed on every Luxe Vista brochure: integrity, excellence, humanity." At that moment, Diane opened the car door and stepped out. Slowly, carefully. Naomi saw her, and something in her posture softened. Her voice became even more grounded. "This is my mother," she said aloud to the room. "Her name is Diane Ellis. She spent 30 years teaching children in schools that never had enough books. She paid off her mortgage early. She never missed a church service. And she saved up every dollar so that someday her daughter could walk into a place like this and feel welcome." Diane now stood inside the entrance, eyes slightly moist but steady. Naomi looked at her, then back at the staff. "And today, you told her, without ever saying it, that she wasn't good enough." No one had anything left to say, and frankly, nothing they could say would have mattered. Naomi hadn't just come to set the record straight. She had come to reclaim space, with her presence, with her poise, with her truth. And in that silence, for the first time, they all saw her, fully, completely, not just as a CEO, not just as a daughter, but as a mirror, reflecting everything they had refused to see. The moment Diane stepped fully into the lobby, everything shifted. Her shoes tapped softly against the marble floor as she walked toward her daughter, her shoulders back, head high, not out of arrogance, but out of habit. That posture had carried her through decades of struggle, through classrooms where resources were scarce but expectations were high, through grocery stores where she was watched more closely than she was greeted, through churches where faith was the only thing that stayed constant. And now, here she was, standing in the very center of a hotel lobby that had, just 20 minutes ago, turned her away like she was nothing more than background noise. Naomi reached out and gently took her mother's hand, and that small gesture, quiet, almost invisible, seemed to thunder through the room. A few gasps escaped from nearby, not dramatic ones, but the kind of low, unconscious sound people make when they realize they were wrong. Naomi leaned slightly toward Diane and whispered, "You okay?" Diane nodded once. "I am now." Across the room, a woman in a green scarf who'd been watching the entire scene finally hit the red button on her phone and went live on Facebook. "I didn't plan on recording this," she whispered to her followers. "But you all need to see what's happening here. This hotel just tried to kick out the CEO of the whole damn company." Moments later, another man opened TikTok and pointed his camera discreetly from behind a palm plant. Within seconds, the moment had left the confines of the lobby and spilled out into the digital world, carried by thumbs, hashtags, and shock. Naomi knew it. She could feel it in the air, the subtle flicker of camera lenses being raised, the shift in body language, the hum of judgment turning into exposure, and she let it happen. Not because she needed an audience, but because people needed to see, to hear, to feel the weight of casual cruelty dressed up in corporate language. She turned back toward the staff, her voice still low, but unmistakably firm. "Let me make this clear," she said, locking eyes with Emily first, then Nicole. "You didn't just disrespect a guest. You disrespected the woman who made me who I am. And by doing that, you disrespected me." She let the silence stretch for a beat, then added, "And I don't forget things like that." Nicole opened her mouth, but whatever excuse she'd been forming dried up on her tongue. Emily shifted her stance, attempting to reclaim control, but the power had already left her hands. That's the thing about humiliation. It can't be undone with a smile or a weak apology, not when it's public, not when it's recorded, not when it's part of a much longer history of women like Diane being told they don't belong. From the back of the lobby, a young man, no older than 22, lifted his phone and whispered to his girlfriend. "That's the woman from the Inc. magazine cover last year, Naomi Ellis. She's the one that turned a $200K loan into a hotel empire." His girlfriend nodded, eyes wide. "And they treated her like she was invisible." The man shook his head. "That ain't just a mistake. That's legacy blindness." The phrase hung in the air even though he didn't say it loud. It was the truth. This wasn't about a missed reservation or a lost email. This was about assumption, bias, a long-standing belief, often unspoken but deeply embedded, that wealth, class, and power look a certain way. And Diane Ellis didn't fit that mold. Naomi stepped slightly forward now. Standing in front of the front desk, she reached into her handbag and slowly pulled out her ID. Not her driver's license, not a business card, but her corporate badge, the one with the Luxe Vista logo in gold foil and her name printed in bold. She laid it on the counter. "You see this?" she said, her tone controlled. "This badge has authorized me to hire, to fire, to redesign policy, and to walk into any one of our properties unannounced. And you didn't recognize it, because it was worn by someone you didn't expect." She paused. "That is what bias looks like." Nicole's face was pale now. Emily looked toward the office door, but there was nowhere to go. No excuse strong enough, no script rehearsed enough to clean this up. One of Naomi's assistants leaned in, murmured something into her ear, and Naomi gave a small nod. The press team was already compiling footage. Legal had already flagged the discriminatory remarks. HR had quietly begun preparing exit packages for several of the employees on duty. But Naomi wasn't finished. Not yet. She glanced around at the growing number of guests in the lobby, some standing, some seated, but nearly all watching. "If any of you were recording," she said calmly, "don't stop. Keep going. People need to see how quickly dignity is dismissed when it doesn't come wrapped in what some of you expect." Her words weren't angry. They were measured, intentional, carved with experience. And then she did something no one expected. She turned, not to Emily, not to Nicole, but to the crowd, to the guests, the tourists, the wealthy regulars sipping $20 cocktails. And she said, "Let me ask you something. If I hadn't come back, if I'd just taken my mother, walked away, and said nothing, how many of you would have even noticed what happened?" She let that question land. quiet and heavy. How many of you would have assumed the staff was right? That we were the ones causing trouble? That we didn't belong? No one answered. They didn't have to. From across the room, a soft voice rose, tentative but clear. "I would have noticed," said Sarah Lynn, the woman who'd started live streaming earlier. She stepped forward, phone still in hand. "And I'm sorry. I didn't say anything when I should have, but I'm saying it now." Naomi met her gaze and nodded, not with forgiveness, but with acknowledgement. Sarah had spoken when it counted. Then Diane spoke. Her voice was quieter, raspier with age, but full of grace. "This isn't the first time someone tried to erase me, and it won't be the last. But today, I'm grateful you all saw it." She turned to the camera, held by Sarah, and added, "Don't let this just be a moment. Let it be a memory that moves you." Naomi squeezed her hand gently. And just like that, the lobby no longer felt like a hotel. It felt like a courtroom, a classroom, a mirror, and everyone inside it was being asked, without force, without shame, to really look at themselves, as the weight of the moment settled. Naomi gently turned toward her mother and extended her hand, not as a gesture of retreat, but of respect. Diane placed her hand in her daughter's without hesitation, and the two women began walking slowly, side by side, through the grand lobby that had, just half an hour earlier, tried to erase them. The marble floor, once cold and indifferent, now seemed to echo with every step. There was no music anymore. Someone had turned it off, or maybe it just felt that way. Conversations had stopped. Even the clinking of glasses at the bar had gone quiet. They passed the front desk without a glance. Naomi didn't need to look back. Her message had already landed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was precise, clean, and impossible to ignore. Guests stood in silence as they watched the two women exit, not as victims, but as the embodiment of grace that refused to bend. As they reached the main doors, the bellhop, a young Latino man who hadn't dared move earlier, quietly stepped forward and pulled them open. He didn't speak, but his eyes said enough: respect, and maybe even a quiet apology for the silence he'd kept. Outside, the city noise welcomed them again, the honk of a yellow cab, the soft rustle of wind down Fifth Avenue, the squeak of sneakers on concrete. Life kept moving. Unaware of what had just unfolded inside, Naomi paused for a moment under the overhang and looked up at the hotel's name etched into stone above the doors. Luxe Vista, Manhattan. She took a breath, then looked to Diane. "You all right?" Diane gave a soft smile. "I was fine the minute you walked back in there," she said. "But I'll admit, seeing their faces when you said your name, that felt good." Naomi allowed herself a small laugh. "I try not to enjoy that part too much," she said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Some victories come quietly, others are earned. This one had been both. The black Mercedes pulled up again. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Naomi motioned for her mother to go ahead, and Diane eased in, slow but steady. Naomi stood at the curb for a moment longer, her eyes scanning the glass lobby behind them. Emily was still inside, standing stiff near the front desk, frozen in a silence she didn't know how to navigate. Naomi didn't wave, she didn't nod, she just looked, and let that be enough, sliding into the back seat. Naomi closed the door behind her, leaned back, and took a long breath. The engine purred quietly. Diane reached over and rested her hand on her daughter's arm. "You did right," she said softly. "Even if they don't admit it." Naomi nodded. She wasn't looking for their admission. She was preparing for something bigger. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through messages, emails from legal, notes from PR, and a live feed of Sarah Lynn's stream, which was already being reposted across every major social platform. The headline typed across the screen read, "CEO called not the type at her own hotel chain." The comments were exploding. People were angry, some shocked, others not surprised at all. "This happens every day to people who aren't CEOs," one woman wrote. "She just happened to be one that could do something about it." Naomi paused at that one, read it twice. Then she whispered, "Exactly." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the late afternoon traffic. Diane sat quietly, watching the city blur past. Naomi was still reading, still thinking, but her mind wasn't on social media. It was on accountability. Not the public kind, the real kind, the kind that changes systems, the kind that costs people their jobs, not out of cruelty, but because dignity has a price. And today, that price had been crossed. "I want full reports on everyone on duty," she said suddenly, speaking into her Bluetooth earpiece. "I want their employee files pulled. I want HR to issue formal termination letters to Emily Carter and Nicole Harris before close of business. And I want our training protocols rewritten. Starting today, bias sensitivity, racial equity, front desk policy. This wasn't a one-time failure. It's systemic, and it ends here." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was clear, calm, surgical, the kind of voice that made things happen. Diane turned to look at her daughter, studying her for a long moment. Naomi had always been strong, but this was something else. This was legacy. Not the kind written on paper, but the kind passed down in moments like this. In the way you hold your chin after being insulted, in the way you respond when power is tested, in the way you protect the people who taught you what dignity really means. "I remember when you were 12, Diane said gently, "and you came home crying because your teacher accused you of cheating just because your answers were too good." Naomi smiled without looking up. "You made me rewrite the essay from scratch and turn it in again. Said if I was going to prove them wrong, I had to do it twice." Diane nodded. "And look at you now." The words hung between them, not boastful, just true. The car slowed as it turned onto Madison Avenue. Naomi's office tower loomed ahead, glass and steel against a pale sky. But she didn't look at it. She looked at her mother. "You shouldn't have to go through that," she said quietly. "Not at this stage in your life." Diane shook her head. "Baby, I shouldn't have had to go through it at any stage. But if this world hasn't learned by now, then maybe it's time they learned the hard way." Naomi nodded slowly. The driver pulled up in front of the building, before stepping out. Naomi turned back one last time, staring out the rear window toward the direction of the hotel. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, focused. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. 20 minutes later. The front entrance of Luxe Vista Manhattan opened once more, but this time, it wasn't quiet. The moment Naomi Ellis stepped back into the lobby, accompanied by her executive operations team and a pair of internal legal officers, everything stopped. No one needed an announcement. Her presence said enough. Her walk was steady, heels echoing cleanly on marble floors that now seemed to brace for what was coming. She wasn't here to argue. She wasn't here to be heard. She was here to execute, to lead, and most of all, to hold people accountable. Guests in the lounge lifted their heads. Employees behind the desk froze mid-keystroke. Even the elevator bell, which rang softly in the background, seemed to mute itself. Naomi's assistant, Melissa Green, stood just behind her, holding a brown envelope and a sleek tablet. The general counsel from corporate, Andrew Wallace, a calm and seasoned black attorney in a gray suit, flanked her other side. Naomi stopped at the front desk, not because she needed to, but because that was the exact spot where her mother had been humiliated. She glanced at Nicole Harris, who was now trembling slightly behind the counter, her hands shaking just enough for the computer mouse to slip from her fingers. Nicole had known this was coming. She just didn't know it would be so final. Naomi looked at her, eyes steady but not cruel. "Ms. Harris," she said evenly, "your employment with Luxe Vista International has been terminated, effective immediately." Nicole opened her mouth, but Naomi continued, unfazed. "This decision is not based on emotion. It is based on policy. You failed to verify a valid reservation. You made assumptions based on appearance. You escalated without cause. And you disrespected a guest, who also happens to be the mother of this company's CEO. Melissa quietly slid an envelope across the counter. "This includes your severance and your exit paperwork. You are to collect your personal items under escort from security and vacate the property within the hour." Naomi didn't wait for a response. She turned to Emily Carter, who was now standing near the side hallway, her face tight, jaw clenched, attempting to preserve some sense of control. "Ms. Carter," Naomi said, walking toward her now, "you will not be returning to your position as front office manager. Your conduct today violated not only hospitality protocol, but every value this company stands for. You will receive a formal letter of termination by the end of business day. You are not permitted to access the internal system, the property's back office, or the staff network from this moment forward." Emily's lips parted. She started to speak, perhaps to defend herself, but Naomi raised a single hand. "This isn't a discussion. You made a choice, and I'm making mine." A small crowd had gathered now. Guests, staff, a few onlookers with their phones still subtly recording. But Naomi didn't acknowledge them. She wasn't performing. She was protecting the brand she built through integrity, not apologies. She turned to Melissa again. "Please begin HR intake for the remaining staff who witnessed the incident. We will retrain or replace as needed. I want the next 30 days to be about correction, not comfort." Melissa nodded and stepped aside to coordinate with two corporate HR leads who had just arrived. Naomi paused, taking in the lobby with fresh eyes, not as someone being judged, but as someone reclaiming ownership. "This space doesn't just belong to the wealthy," she said softly to no one in particular. "It belongs to those who uphold its values." Then, in one final motion, she walked past the desk, past the elevators, and toward the VIP suite hallway. As she passed a young black concierge near the back wall, someone who had remained quiet the entire time, she offered a brief nod. It wasn't approval. It was a signal. "I saw you. You matter. And we're going to rebuild this place the right way." Later that evening, long after the crowd had cleared and the hotel lobby had returned to its polished quiet, Naomi Ellis stood alone on the balcony of the presidential suite. The same room her mother had been denied just hours earlier now sat behind her. Fresh orchids on the marble table, a handwritten welcome note on the pillow, and 2 glasses of sparkling cider waiting by the window. But Naomi wasn't ready to sit down just yet. She leaned on the railing, looking out over Manhattan as the city lights flickered into the night. The sky was deep gray, and the breeze carried just enough chill to remind her this day had been real. Behind her, Diane stepped out of the room slowly, a soft cashmere shawl draped over her shoulders, her hair down now. She walked up beside her daughter and said nothing for a moment. They just stood there, 2 generations of resilience, breathing in the night air like it was finally theirs. Naomi broke the silence first. "I kept thinking today, what if I hadn't come back? What if I'd just walked away like they wanted me to?" Diane looked at her, smile quiet but firm. "Then they would have won, and they wouldn't have even known it." Naomi nodded slowly. "But this time, they didn't." Diane took her hand gently. "No, this time, They learned. Naomi turned toward her mother then, fully, her voice softer now. You know, I didn't build all this just to be rich. I built it because I was tired of seeing us get turned away, tired of watching you get overlooked. I wanted to create something that couldn't be taken from us the moment we walked through the door. Diane's eyes glistened. And you did, she said. You built a world where we get to stay, where we don't have to prove we belong. We just do. Inside the suite. Naomi's phone buzzed. She didn't move. She didn't need to check it. She already knew what it was. Statements being drafted, policy updates initiated, messages from board members praising her leadership. But this moment wasn't about them. It was about something quieter, something deeper, a reckoning, not with anger, but with clarity. Across town, the live stream had gone viral. Over 3.2 million views in less than 5 hours. The hashtags were spreading. Hashtag dignity is non-negotiable. Hashtag Naomi Ellis. Hashtag this is what bias looks like. But Naomi didn't care about the numbers. She cared about the message. And more importantly, she cared about what came next. Because this wasn't going to end with firings or statements. It was going to start there. The next morning, she would announce the launch of a company-wide initiative called Project Reverence, a full-scale equity retraining, leadership re-education, and a mentorship pipeline that would open doors for young Black women in the hospitality industry. Not a PR stunt, a permanent shift. I want people who look like us, Naomi whispered to her mother, to know they don't have to rise in silence anymore, that when they speak, the room changes, the world changes. Diane smiled again, slower this time. Then you keep doing what you're doing, she said, and I'll be right here, watching you take back every space they ever tried to keep from us. They stood there a little longer, the sound of city life floating up from the street below. It wasn't loud. It was steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a city still trying to grow, and above it. 2 women stood unshaken, wrapped in the kind of quiet power that doesn't ask permission. Naomi glanced at the skyline once more, then turned back inside. Holding the door open for her mother, Diane walked in, slow but certain. Naomi followed, her steps sure and steady. The suite door closed behind them, not on the day, but on a chapter, and in its place. Something new was beginning, not revenge, not headlines, but legacy. If this story moves you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes respect should never depend on appearance. Until next time, stand tall, speak the truth, and never forget who you are.